At dusk, the town of Elmridge held a hazy, dreamlike quality, as if the place itself hadn't yet decided whether to hold on to the light or surrender fully to the encroaching dark. The dense oak branches whispered in the evening breeze, casting long shadows across the worn stone sidewalks. Street lamps flickered on one by one, their yellow light slow to brighten, like everything else in this town, slow and silent. Bridget Calloway left the hospital at 7:17 p.m., half an hour later than her usual shift. Her thin white lab coat clung damply with sweat after a long day in the emergency room. She drove quietly through the center of town, past a few small shops closing up, their wooden signs swaying gently in the wind. Her house sat at the end of a street shaded by ancient oaks, a white-painted home with a black-tiled roof, a small porch, and a low fence. She'd lived there for over 8 years with her young daughter, Sophie. Every evening when she returned home, she would hear her daughter's laughter drifting from the living room or the backyard. But tonight, silence. No sound from the TV. No small footsteps racing down the wooden hallway. No lights on inside the house. Bridget hurried to the door. Her hand paused on the knob, brows furrowing. The door was unlocked. Not Sophie. The girl always waited for her mother to come home before opening the door. And Bridget always locked up like any careful single mother. Her chest tightened, a primal instinct, as if something in the rhythm of everyday life had just gone askew. Sophie, she called out loudly, pushing the door open. No answer. The lights were off. The air inside smelled of dust and cold food. A plate of spaghetti sat on the table untouched. The spoon had fallen to one side. Bridget passed through the living room, her eyes quickly scanning each corner. Everything seemed intact. No signs of forced entry. No drawers left open. But something was wrong. Sophie. Her voice cracked, this time sharper, more urgent. Still no reply. She ran upstairs. Her daughter's door was slightly ajar. She pushed it gently. Inside, darkness. Only the faint glow of a star-shaped night light cast shadows on the ceiling. She flipped the switch. The room lit up, but it was empty. The blanket was neatly folded. Teddy bears in their usual spots. No sign of panic. Nothing knocked over. Until she opened the closet. Sophie was curled up in the farthest corner, knees pulled tightly to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the space between the hanging coats. Oh my God! Sophie! Bridget dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the girl. I'm here. I'm here now. What happened, sweetheart? Who? But Sophie said nothing. No sobbing. No resistance. Not a word. Her eyes were empty like still water. She didn't look at her mother, didn't glance around the room. Just stared through it all. 3 hours later, the police arrived. A swift inspection followed, no forced entry, no sign of intrusion, nothing missing, no strangers caught on traffic cams in the area. She might have locked herself in there after hearing something outside, one officer suggested, cautious but clearly doubtful. Could just be imagination. Bridget said nothing. She nodded, but she didn't believe it. A child can be afraid of the dark, can hide under blankets at the sound of thunder. But not this. Not this kind of silence. Not eyes that no longer recognized her. No, something else had happened. A fracture had formed. Invisible but deep. And Bridget knew, that night, someone had been in the house. Sophie didn't speak for 7 days. 7 nights, Bridget lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, to the creak of wooden floors each time she checked the front door, the windows, the garden gate, then returned inside to rest a hand on her daughter's shoulder. As if trying to pass along a silent promise, you're safe. But Sophie didn't sleep. She only closed her eyes, still and quiet, as though she had hidden herself away in some unreachable place deep inside, and Bridget could not follow. Each night, after Bridget thought her daughter had finally drifted off, she would hear the soft sound of small feet on the floorboards, then see Sophie's shadow by the bedroom window staring out into the backyard at the old oak tree. That massive tree, its roots rising from the ground like claws, had stood there longer than anyone in the house had lived. But now every time Bridget looked at it, she felt a chill. Something about the way its shadow fell, about the darkness the porch light could never touch, made her feel watched. She began doing things she once thought were excessive. Installing motion sensor lights, adding double deadbolts, buying a smart doorbell, checking every lock each night, twice, then 3 times. Still, whenever she stepped into Sophie's room and saw her daughter standing silently by the window, moonlight casting a pale, hollow glow across her face, Bridget knew every lock in the world couldn't keep out whatever was creeping into that little girl's mind. On the 8th day, she took Sophie to see Dr. Eleonora Marsh, a middle-aged woman with a warm voice and eyes that seemed to see through more layers of silence than anyone Bridget had ever met. You don't have to say anything, Dr. Marsh said, sitting across from Sophie in a sunlit therapy room filled with plants. Just being here is enough. Sophie didn't reply, didn't nod, didn't even look up. But she didn't run either. And she didn't cry. After the session, Dr. Marsh spoke to Bridget privately in the hallway. She's showing a textbook response to trauma, the doctor said gently. But it will take a long time before she feels the world is a place where she can speak without being hurt. Bridget sighed. I don't know what to do anymore. Don't try to force her to talk, Dr. Marsh replied. We'll try something different. A companion she can trust. Not a person. Bridget frowned. An animal? The doctor smiled. A therapy dog. They know how to listen even when people no longer can. Bridget had never owned a dog. She'd always feared the chaos, fur, smells, the extra responsibility. But when she returned home and saw Sophie curled by the window, eyes still and flat as a dead lake, she knew she'd already lost. Not to her daughter, but to the silence. And if a dog could break that silence, just a small crack, she would do anything. A week later, she drove Sophie to the Linford Recovery Center, where therapy dogs were trained to help children coping with psychological trauma. On the drive, Sophie said nothing. She didn't look out the window. She didn't ask where they were going. It was as if she already knew. And was waiting. The Linford Recovery Center sat on the outskirts of town, down a quiet stretch of red dirt road that passed cornfields and sparse eucalyptus groves. The main house, made of dark wood, nestled in the middle of a wide yard where sunlight spilled gently across the backs of dogs playing or training with their handlers. Bridget parked the car under the shade of a young oak near the gate. She glanced into the rearview mirror. Sophie was staring straight at the small iron gate, her face emotionless, but unlike usual, she didn't turn away. Not disgusted. Not afraid. Just silently waiting. We're here, sweetheart. No response. Bridget got out first, opened the back door, and leaned in to unbuckle her daughter's seatbelt. She gently touched Sophie's shoulder, her small hand was as cold as well water. As she stepped out of the car, Sophie took her mother's hand, not tightly, but for the first time since that night, she didn't pull away either. Dr. Mireille Faulkner was the lead specialist in animal-assisted therapy at Linford. A woman in her 40s, petite, with neatly tied blonde hair and sharp, calm eyes. Hello, Ms. Calloway. And hello, Sophie, she greeted softly without bending down or using that high-pitched voice people often reserve for children. Bridget silently appreciated that. Sophie only blinked but held on to her mother's hand. There's no need to force anything today, Dr. Faulkner continued. We'll just take a little walk. Meet a few friends. If Sophie likes anyone, we'll let her choose. She led them along a stone-paved path toward the training yard. There, nearly a dozen dogs of all breeds and sizes moved about with their trainers. Some sat calmly beside children, others were focused on following commands. Bridget could feel Sophie's body tensing, her small shoulders drew slightly inward, but she didn't let go of her mother's hand. They stopped near a wooden bench. Dr. Faulkner gave a signal and a trainer brought over a large dog, dark brown with black markings, sleek short fur, a strong build but a gentle gait. The dog stopped in front of them and sat neatly, eyes fixed on Sophie. This is Alden, Dr. Faulkner introduced. He used to be a working dog. Now he's retired and learning how to be a friend. Bridget held her breath. She expected nothing. Had even prepared herself for Sophie to show no reaction. But then the girl took one small step toward the dog. Alden didn't move. He just breathed steadily, his tail giving a slight wag. Sophie sat down. Perfect silence. Then she reached out her hand. Her fingertips brushed against the rough fur on Alden's head. No one said a word. No one dared. Alden didn't lick her hand, didn't react wildly. He simply sat still, letting Sophie touch him, then slowly lowered his head as if bowing to an old friend. Bridget turned away, eye stinging. They brought Alden home 3 days later. Bridget had prepared everything, a mat, food, a leash, even a quiet corner in the living room. But Alden didn't seem to need much besides Sophie's presence. That night, for the first time, Sophie didn't stand by the window. Instead, she lay beside Alden on the living room floor, her head resting on his belly, eyes closed, breathing steady. Bridget turned off the lights. No sound. No shadow in the yard. Only the soft glow of the hallway lamp, silver moonlight through the curtains, and 2 living beings, 1 child and 1 dog, sleeping together. And for the first time in many long nights, Bridget was able to sleep. A week had passed since Alden came to live in the small house at the end of Oak Street. Though Bridget had never owned a dog before, she realized everything had changed in ways she hadn't expected, quieter but somehow more alive. Alden wasn't the kind of dog that barked often. He always kept just enough distance from the world, not overly clingy but never indifferent. Yet every time Sophie entered a room, his eyes lit up instantly. Sophie still didn't speak, not yet. But she had started drawing again. Simple pictures, circles, trees, the sun, and always a dog beside her. Usually Alden, with his distinctive folded ear. Bridget pinned them to the fridge, like wordless letters from a world slowly coming back to life. The 8th night, Bridget dozed off just before 1 a.m. She still kept her old routine, checking the locks 3 times, drawing the curtains tightly, the motion sensor lights switched on in the backyard. Alden was lying right by Sophie's bedroom door, as usual. But in the middle of the night, a low growl echoed softly. Not loud, not aggressive, but enough to wake a mother who had lived in fear. Bridget sat up, heart instantly racing. The growl continued, deep, low, steady, and focused. She stepped quickly into the hallway, bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. Alden was standing at Sophie's bedroom window. The fur along his spine was raised, his body tense. He wasn't barking, just growling softly as if warning something on the other side of the glass. Sophie was standing there too, her hand resting on Alden's back, eyes wide open, unblinking. Bridget didn't need to look to know what they were staring at, but she walked over anyway and gently pulled back the curtain. And her heart skipped a beat. Someone was standing beneath the oak tree. Not moving, not approaching. Just standing there, in the darkness, right at the edge where the motion lights couldn't reach. A figure barely visible, like a patch of darkness darker than the rest. Bridget quickly switched on the porch light. No one was there. She flung the door open and ran into the yard. Alden barked loudly for the first time since coming home and bolted after her. Cold wind slid down her collar. The oak's shadow sprawled across the ground like a giant hand. But no footprints. No sound. Nothing. Alden circled the fence, then stopped, growling at the farthest corner of the yard for a long while before finally returning inside. Bridget called the police. Nothing was found. No sign of forced entry. No unusual motion picked up by neighborhood cameras. It could have been someone passing through, the officer said while checking the yard. Just walking by, then left. Bridget didn't believe it. It wasn't someone wandering. That person stood still, watching, knowing exactly what they were doing. The next morning, Sophie ate breakfast. Still silent. But for the first time since the incident, she didn't sit across the table, she sat close to her mother. Bridget placed the plate of eggs in front of her daughter, then turned to make coffee. When she turned back, she saw Sophie drawing. A blank sheet of paper. A black pencil. It was the familiar oak tree. Alden. And the girl. But this time, in the lower corner of the drawing, there was a figure. Faceless. Just a shadow standing upright, with arms unusually long, toes touching the fence. And beneath him, a very large shoe print. Bridget stared at the drawing. Sophie had never drawn anyone but Alden and the trees. The girl looked up. Said nothing. But in her eyes, there was something that had never been there before. A warning. The next morning, Bridget didn't go to work. She called in to take the day off, something she had rarely done in the past 8 years. Not because she was tired, not because she was sick, but because of a feeling deep in her bones. If she left the house, her daughter would be watched. She couldn't explain the feeling. She only knew it was real, oppressive, like an invisible hand tightening around her chest. Sophie sat on the living room floor, her back against the sofa, a box of colored pencils in front of her. Alden lay beside her, his head resting on her legs, breathing steadily. Bridget sat farther away, not interfering. She had learned not to pressure Sophie, not to ask too soon. Instead, she waited. The black pencil moved. A square. A tree. A shadow. A gate. A van. Bridget tensed. The van wasn't perfectly drawn to scale, but the details were too specific to be imagined. Sophie had seen that van. Seen it clearly. Clear enough to remember the off-center door handle, the rear window tinted black, and a slight dent at the front, something one would only notice when standing close. Bridget kept her voice calm. Sophie, this van. Sophie paused, still holding the pencil, but didn't look at her mother. She picked another color, deep red. With short, firm strokes, Sophie shaded in a smear on the driver's side windshield. Like blood. Bridget called the police. This was no longer an emotional reaction. She needed someone who would take what Sophie remembered seriously, someone who did more than take a statement. That afternoon, Special Investigator Marcus Hale arrived. A tall, middle-aged man with a deep voice and none of the pitying looks Bridget had grown used to. When he stepped inside, his eyes didn't go to Bridget first, they found Alden. The dog stood up immediately, didn't growl, didn't retreat, just tracked his every step. Hale nodded as if in quiet understanding. I heard Sophie remembered something? Bridget led him to the dining table where the drawing still lay. He picked it up and studied it in silence for a long moment. Then he flipped it over. Is there more? Bridget hesitated, then pulled open a drawer. A stack of drawings Sophie had quietly kept. One after another. A man with a torn sleeve. A scar shaped like a hook curling from his left wrist to the center of his palm. A hand wearing a black ring. And finally a pair of eyes, no face, just two large, black pupils floating in the dark. Hale examined each drawing closely. Not imagination, he said almost immediately. You believe her? Bridget asked. I've seen kids draw like this before. They don't make things up. They don't exaggerate. They remember not in order, not to scale, but by sensation. And sensation is never wrong. Bridget sank into a chair, her voice fading. I need to know, did he ever come inside the house? Hale nodded, his expression tightening. I don't think it was just once. The next morning, Bridget checked the gate lock as usual. But this time, the back gate, the one that opened onto the alley, showed signs of being pushed hard. Chipped paint. Loose screws. A silver scrape across the latch. She didn't say a word. She simply took a photo with her phone and called Hale. That evening, Hale returned. But this time, he brought a technician and a motion-triggered infrared camera. We're going to install a surveillance unit behind the house, he said. If he comes back, we'll see his face. Bridget only nodded. After they left, Sophie began drawing again. This time, Bridget didn't ask. She stood silently behind her daughter. A new scene appeared on the paper. Sophie standing within Alden's protective circle on the front porch. Facing them, a man half submerged in shadow. In his hand, something gleamed, something metallic. His face still absent. Just a single slash across where the mouth should be like a scar. Bridget looked down at Alden. The dog remained silent, eyes open, ears perked as if he, too, could see what was on the page. The infrared motion camera was installed that very night, discreetly mounted on the back porch eaves, just high enough to cover the entire patch of ground behind the oak tree, the place where he had once stood. Marcus Hale personally reviewed the camera's settings, insisting it record in both day and night conditions, capture audio if unusual sounds were detected, and most importantly, flag movements that didn't match the thermal signature of an animal. Bridget didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of a feeling something drawing closer, like the air before a storm. The next morning, Hale returned. He looked more serious than usual. The camera recorded footage at 3:41 a.m. Bridget glanced at Sophie. The girl was sitting on the rug with Alden, sketching a large circle. A dark figure stood in the center. Hale placed a laptop on the table. He hit play. The recording began. A black and white frame. Timestamp in the top left, 3 hours 41 minutes and 6 seconds. The oak tree stood still. The porch light glowed faintly. Everything was quiet. Then, suddenly, movement. A figure stepped into the frame from the right edge. Slowly. Calmly. He didn't lower his head. Didn't hurry. It was as if he knew exactly where the camera was. Bridget shivered. The man stopped about 5 meters from the back fence. He stood exactly as Sophie had drawn him before, back straight, broad shoulders, arms relaxed at his sides. The porch light triggered motion sensor. And as the light reached him, one detail became clear. His right hand wore a thick black ring with a raised, glossy surface. Hale paused the video. See it? Bridget nodded, her heart pounding. That ring, Sophie had drawn it. She had remembered it perfectly. I've seen this ring before, Hale said, his voice low. I'm not certain, but there was a case 2 years ago in Pinebrook, about a 4-hour drive from here. He pulled a worn folder from his bag, flipped through a few pages quickly. A little girl named Eliza Tannen went missing at age 6. No one saw anything, no cameras, no evidence. But a witness said they saw a man wearing a black ring near the kindergarten where she attended. He was never caught? Bridget asked. No. And Eliza was never found. Hale held up a printed still from the video, zoomed in. The man's face was still unclear. He wore a low baseball cap, his head slightly down. But the hand was unmistakable. Pale. Long fingers. And the black ring gleaming under the porch light. Hale murmured. We need to find out who's worn one of these, who's been seen in this area or Pinebrook. And there's something else. He pointed at the man's hand in the image. There's a scar. Bridget squinted. Yes. Just below the wrist, a long, thin scar, curved like a hook. Just like the one in Sophie's drawing. That evening. Bridget locked the doors, drew the curtains, set the kettle on the stove, like always. But now, the lights inside the house felt like a declaration to whoever was out there. I'm waiting for you to come back. After dinner, Sophie drew again. This time it was the inside of a room. Not the living room, not their house. A round ceiling light. A small window. A metal bed. And in the corner, a shackle. Bridget asked quietly. "You were there, weren't you?" Sophie didn't answer. But she nodded. Just barely. For the first time. Alden gently licked Sophie's hand, then lay down close beside her as if he, too, remembered that place. Bridget immediately called Hale. She remembers where she was held. There was a brief silence on the line. Then he's definitely someone from her past, Hale said. And he didn't come back just to scare her. He's testing, trying to see how much she remembers. A chill ran down Bridget's spine. This wasn't the past returning. It had never really left. Night fell faster than usual. The wind carried the scent of burning wood from houses a few blocks away, mixing with the damp smell of freshly watered grass. The air held a strange, uneasy chill, not the cold of weather, but of something or someone out there, drawing closer with every step. Bridget sat in the living room, every light in the house turned on, yet a weight pressed on her chest. Hale had left earlier than usual, taking the camera footage and a promise to identify the man with the black ring. But she knew the man wouldn't wait for the investigation. He would act first. Sophie sat silently on the rug, different this time, not drawing. She held a blank sheet of paper in her hands, her index finger tracing invisible circles over it again and again. Alden lay right beside her, eyes open, ears perked, alert. Bridget watched but didn't interrupt. She had learned, sometimes Sophie's silence spoke more than 100 questions ever could. And tonight, Sophie was calculating something. She tilted her head, lightly nudging Alden with her shoulder. The dog immediately sat upright. Sophie raised 3 fingers, held them still for 2 seconds, then traced another circle on the paper. Alden lifted his head, letting out a low whine. Bridget stood and slowly approached, not interfering but unable to look away. Sophie made the signs again. A circle pointed to the window, tapped the floor softly, and finally pointed to her neck. Not a word spoken, but Bridget understood. He's coming. The back door. And he's bringing something. And Alden understood even more. The dog turned, left his spot, and walked silently toward the back porch, exactly where the man had stood just nights ago. No barking. No growling. Just waiting. Bridget shivered. How did Sophie know? The answer was in her eyes, as if there was a link between her and the darkness outside that no adult could comprehend. 2:53 a.m. Bridget hadn't slept. She sat on the bedroom threshold, lights off, curtains slightly open. Alden was in position, curled beneath the back window, still as a statue. Sophie slept, or pretended to, on the living room sofa. Her hand clenched a half-finished drawing. No car. No footsteps. But wind. It rose suddenly. Colder. Lower. Like the breath of something that didn't belong to the day. And then Alden growled softly. Not long. Not loud. But unmistakable. Bridget held her breath. Her hand gripped the wooden banister. Alden stepped onto the windowsill, eyes locked outside. The porch light didn't come on. A blind spot. And in it, a figure. He was back. This time, he didn't stand still. He moved closer. 2 steps. 3. Less than a meter from the fence. And at that moment, Sophie sat up. No scream. No fear. She walked quickly to Alden, held up 3 fingers, just like before. Alden responded instantly, body tense, a fierce growl erupting from his chest. For the first time, not restraint. Not warning. Defiance. Defense. Bridget lunged for the back door, yanking the handle. The motion sensor lights flared to life. And caught him just in time. A tall man in a long coat, wearing a baseball cap. Right hand, black ring. Left wrist, scar, curved like a hook. He stood under the light, fully visible for the first time. His face wasn't entirely clear, but his eyes, they found Sophie, not Bridget. Then he turned. Didn't run. Walked calmly down the alley behind the house. Alden wanted to chase. Bridget held him back just in time. She didn't know if she was shaking from fear or rage. 15 minutes later, Hale arrived. He reviewed the footage on site. This time it was clear. The man walked up to the fence. Looked into the house. Stood under the light. No ambiguity. I'll run facial recognition through the federal database, Hale said. Give me 1 day. Bridget nodded silently. Sophie sat with Alden, holding the same drawing from earlier. She drew a pair of eyes right in the center of the page. No face. No head. Just 2 round, deep, black, living eyes. Beneath them, in block letters written with a shaky hand, Sophie printed. He remembers me. Bridget felt the blood freeze in her veins. Alden whimpered softly but didn't move. Bridget pulled her daughter close, voice trembling. He might remember, but we won't let him do it again. I promise. Alden laid his head across both their legs. And for the first time in the dark, Sophie spoke. So faintly it was like wind slipping through a cracked window. but clear. I remember him too. Bridget held her tighter. The silence was broken, but the nightmare had just begun. Bridget's home had now become a silent fortress. 3 cameras, front, back, and side. Motion-triggered floodlights. Digital locks. A sleepless mother and a dog that never rested. And at the center of it all, Sophie. More awake than ever. After the morning Hale brought back the file on Elias Mercer, Bridget learned that the name hadn't just passed through town, he'd been known. Elias had once delivered packages to the nursing home where Bridget's mother had lived. He'd been seen on parking lot cameras. Had casual conversations with nurses. Had slipped down hallways when no one was watching. And a week after Bridget's mother died, he vanished. That night, Sophie didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid. Because she was waiting. Bridget knew. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Alden lay at the back door, growling softly at intervals like the ticking of a countdown. 1:24 a.m. A faint click. From the back door. Bridget sprang from her seat like a spring. Flashlight and phone already in hand. Alden stood up instantly. Sophie showed no fear. She nodded, small but deliberate. Bridget rushed to the security screen, nothing. Then the side camera triggered. She switched to the feed. A figure darted across, hugging the wall, avoiding every patch of light. He wasn't breaking in. He was unlocking the door. Hale had warned her, he's clever. Not violent. He knows suburban layouts. And Bridget knew he had been in this house before. A soft clink like a needle dropping. The door cracked open. A cold breeze drifted in. Alden growled, deep, almost like a roar. Bridget didn't think. She kicked the door open and shone her light into the yard. He stood on the back step. No cap. No mask. Elias Mercer. His face was gaunt, twisted by a healed scar that pulled one side of his mouth downward. His eyes wide, but not looking at Bridget. He looked at Sophie. Then he spoke for the first time. His voice low, slow, as if each word clawed its way out of his throat. Do you remember me? Sophie stood behind her mother, silent. Bridget raised her phone, ready to call 911, but Elias stepped back, smiled faintly, and raised empty hands. I just came to remind her she used to be mine. A mistake. Alden snarled and launched off the porch. Bridget screamed, but it was too late. The dog slammed into Elias, knocking him flat, his teeth just inches from the man's neck. Elias didn't fight back. He lay still, breathing hard, eyes wide like he wanted to be caught. Hale and the police arrived within 9 minutes. Elias was handcuffed and taken away. He said nothing more, except one final look at Sophie, lips moving silently. Silence was the promise. You said you would. Sophie didn't respond, but Bridget saw her daughter's hand tighten around Alden's ear. Not trembling, not scared, just certain. The next morning, Hale sat with Bridget in the kitchen. He's not getting out, he said. Breaking and entering, mental health record, connections to 2 missing persons cases. Why did he come back? Bridget asked. Hale was quiet for a long moment. Some twisted people don't need reasons. But I think he was afraid Sophie would remember. And she did. Bridget looked toward the living room. Sophie was sleeping. Alden lay close beside her. On the table sat her final drawing before Elias was caught. A little girl holding a dog's paw. In the distance, a shadow locked in a frame. At the bottom, for the first time in her own handwriting, Sophie had written, I won't be silent anymore. Bridget folded the drawing, eyes stinging. And for the first time in months in that house, there was peace. Not the temporary kind. The real kind.